Welcome to the Journey to Happy podcast. I am Olga, your host and founder of Olga's Way. And today I'm super excited to introduce you to a good friend of mine, Stephanie Booth. I have to tell you guys, this is the second time we're recording this interview because I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I've got baby brain. And so we did this once. And it was the most amazing interview, perhaps one of the longest ones I've done. And by the time we were done the interview, I went to stop the recording and noticed I had never started it. So this makes this interview so much more special to me, Stephanie, because now you've donated your time to me twice. And I'm so thankful for that. You are a
I have been there. I know what this feels like.
Thank you. One of the reasons I love working with women, there is that grace of women to women. We understand. Mm-hmm. And Stephanie has a little boy who's adorable. I encourage you later when she gives us her handle to actually follow her on Instagram so that you can just enjoy that little boy because he's so adorable, the videos that she posts of him. But enough of that. Let me truly introduce you to Stephanie. Stephanie Booth is a business coach. And her specialty is helping entrepreneurs go from burnout to creating a profitable and fulfilling business. She specializes in helping clients create six-figure business by overcoming burnout, perfectionism, and comparison. And as she helps her clients scale in a quickly manner their business. Stephanie is the perfect person to teach this kind of business transformation because it was her own story. After years of teaching, Stephanie took over her booming photographer business full-time and promptly ran her business into the ground out of fear. She's actually going to go into details about this with us, which is amazing. In 6 weeks' time, Stephanie hit rock bottom, experiencing loss after loss. During this time, she found the biggest gift she could have ever received, finding her purpose. Tuned into her greater purpose and leaving fear behind, Stephanie quickly rebuilt her photography business, acquiring dream five-figure clients, publications on world's top blogs and magazines, and slowly, or I should say fast, really, 6 weeks is very fast, she rebuilt her six-figure business in 4 months. That's impressive. Now that she was able to connect back with her passion in business, she has creating a thriving business, and I would say multiple businesses now. And she realized that the path that she walked through, many people need to walk through, and who better than somebody who's been there to guide them. So that's what she does. As I said, she also has a little guy, so she's a mom, she's a wife, and she's a businesswoman, and she's overly generous to be with us, sharing her time, her experience, her expertise for the second time with our community. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining my community. And I know your talk is going to be powerful because even after our first interview yesterday, I was feeling like, oh my God, this is so amazing that we're going to be putting this live and that other people are going to be able to listen to this conversation. So thank you. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I didn't say the name of your business. Do you want to introduce us to your business?
Yeah, so I am the founder of a business called The Successful Creative. And the name stems from the fact that so many creatives are starving artists and they're making things that light them up. They're passionate about them, but they really don't know what their idea of success is and they don't know how to get there. So that's what I do. I help them find their version of success and be creative in the process.
Okay, two things you just said that I loved. Their version of success. I love that you don't have a cookie cutter. Everybody's success should look this way because the perfectionist mind kind of thinks that just give me the list of things I have to do. So this is fun that you give people the freedom to find their own version of success. And also You said this phrase to me, which really, like, I love that. So I'm just going to bring you bring you back to it, which is your purpose when you're working with people is bring them from breakdown to breakthrough. And I just want the audience to know, you guys are probably listening to this podcast right now and thinking, business coach, why would I want to listen to this? And I encourage you to stay and to listen to what we're about to tell you. Because if you look at what Stephanie specializes on, overcoming burnout, overcoming perfectionism, overcoming comparison, that doesn't just relate to entrepreneurs and people who are in business. This relates to humankind, all of us. We can all use some mind shifting that take us from breakdown to breakthrough. And so I really welcome you to stay attentive to this conversation. Stephanie's going to give us actual tips on how to make that transition. How does the mindset actually impact everything else? And you know what? Sometimes when we think of mindset, I know that used to be the case for me. It used to seem like that's so hard. How do you actually get to change the mind? And Stephanie makes it sound so simple. So I'm excited for you to listen to this interview and for you, Stephanie, to just dive into this conversation. So something that you said to me earlier was you taught yourself how to change your thinking.
Yeah.
So maybe tell us a little bit about how you went from having a successful business to run it down to the ground because out of fear. Explain that a little bit to us and how you got out of that.
Yeah. I know my story may be specific in the fact that it's related to entrepreneurship, but the themes are absolutely universal. So I was a teacher. I taught 5th grade and ran a grant program for at-risk kiddos. And I loved it until I didn't, until I was in the politics and facing budget cuts and couldn't actually spend the time dedicated to the kiddos in my classroom. And it was starting to weigh me down. However, I just figured that's what I got my degree in. That's what I'm supposed to do. And meanwhile, my husband and I were growing this photography business on the side. 5 days before the school year started one year, 4 years ago now, I got the call that my job had been cut. So it was not enough time by any stretch of the imagination to find another teaching job. Took a look at our business, and by this time we were about 2 years in, and I was looking at everything, and we were on track to hit our first 6-figure year. So I looked at that and thought, oh, I could not just replace my income, but I could double it. Great. And honestly, I had never made that much money before. And that became the first problem because my thinking was very limited. So I left my teaching job, took over our photography business. It was looking really, really good. And I jumped right in. All the numbers looked great. But what I didn't realize was I was running on the fumes of my husband's work. And I had this running to-do list. And so I'd start doing things and then I would get scared. And I would think, oh, you know what? I'm just going to wait on that one until tomorrow. And it was all the revenue generating activities that required me to be seen. And I had a major imposter syndrome. And I was...
Wait. So my clients don't know what that means. That, because I think that, or I'm assuming most people don't know, that's a very, very business term. I would like for you to explain that because I think that happens to every single person.
Yeah.
We just don't understand that that's what we're doing. So what's the imposter syndrome?
Yes. So imposter syndrome is just this idea of when you compare yourself to other people, problem number one, you feel that you are a fraud, that somebody's going to find you out for not really being the best or not really being who you say you are. Right? So it's this idea that you're going to become a deer in the headlights. you're going to freeze and everyone's going to be looking at you and going, you're a fake, right? So I was running my business believing that's what was going to happen to me. And all that made was a lot of avoidance. So I was running our business, but I would only do the things I was guaranteed to be absolutely perfect at. I had a very fixed mindset. I believed that I was born with a set of traits that I was inherently good at and a set of traits I was inherently bad at. Mm-hmm. And if I did anything in the bad at section, math, for instance, I was born bad at math, quote unquote. I was born, quote unquote, great at grammar. Okay, so if I then got less than 100% on my spelling test in elementary school, that shook my entire identity because I had to do only the things I was perfect at. It creates a lot of pressure. And entrepreneurship specifically challenges this idea of perfection. So I have lived a lot of my life only pursuing the things that I could first guarantee that I was perfect at, that I could over deliver on, that I could get 100% A++. Like if I didn't know in my head before I started that was going to be the result, I would absolutely not do it. And so I had the luxury of doing that a majority of my life until I'm running a business. And then I realized all that did was back me into a corner because now all that I had on my to-do list were all the things that there was so much risk involved. I didn't know what was going to happen.
And by risk, you mean you couldn't guarantee that you were going to be perfect at all.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and just for a few seconds, I love that you're being vulnerable and sharing this with us. I also want to make the parallel to just the basics of how the brain works and mental traps. And the perfectionist mind is a mental trap. We call it cognitive distortion, which is when we think that unless we're going to do something perfect, we're not going to do it at all. It's also referred to as the black or white mentality, right? Like it's either black or it's either white, but there isn't such a thing as gray. And I mean, and for anybody listening, what in life is so clear as black and white, right? There's so much gray. And I just love you call that fear, Stephanie, because that's exactly what this type of mental trap creates in a human is fear that stops them from trying things that may potentially make them happy.
Yes.
On the basis of, well, I'm just being a perfectionist, which sounds so good, right? Like our ego wants to feed that thought of like, yes, you want to be a perfectionist. I think I was telling you yesterday at one of my trainings on how to be interviewed after I was done my degree, one of the things they told us to do, coach us to do, to say in an interview is if they asked what our weaknesses were, to say we were perfectionists, because that makes it sound so amazing, right? Like any employer would be like, absolutely, I want to hire a perfectionist.
They're going to deliver perfection.
Yeah. So I love that you're putting that perspective and how that got you into greater trouble. So you had like now this massive list of things you were postponing. You were doing avoidance at that point.
Which is the flip side of perfectionism is avoidance. So in that job interview, what they don't know is you're not delivering perfection. You're actually delivering a whole lot of avoidance, right?
You're actually not delivering.
Exactly.
Our master at procrastinating.
Yeah, that was my problem. And I didn't realize it was a problem because I was looking at all the wrong things. Like, you're going to find evidence to support whatever you want in your life. Your brain is made that way to say, okay, you believe that things are okay with you avoiding all this stuff. Okay, look at this. You're getting published on all these magazines around the world. You're fully booked. Look at the numbers this year, right? Hello, they're in the past. They're already done. I didn't make those numbers happen. My husband got them on the calendar, not me. So I'm comforting myself with false benefits. And it was at the end of that I started panicking because I realized I have gotten myself into some deep doo-doo. And I eased myself into the conversation, and I just told my husband, hey, bookings have been kind of slow. I'm sorry. I'm working on it. Right? Like, I want him to feel like I'm doing everything I can. I had this really victim based mindset where like everything was out of my control. I'm trying to deliver perfection and it's just not working. I can't help it. That was a phrase I said all the time. So I eased him into that in December of that year. And then we were photographing a wedding and I was pregnant and we're really excited. It was the most difficult wedding of our year. And I started to miscarry and I knew something was wrong. And I kept telling Stephen, something's not right. And it was the next day. So start the new year, January 1st, we lost our baby and I was heartbroken. I felt absolutely annoyed by my own body. I felt devastated and I just didn't understand why this would happen. And it was in that time that I realized the problem that I was experiencing with not having bookings was so much greater than what I told Stephen. He needed to know how desperate I felt. And previously, I just didn't feel like I could be that vulnerable with him. And all of a sudden, I felt like the floodgates were open. I was devastated. I was grieving. And so I just told him, like, we're screwed. I do not know where my next paycheck is coming from. We haven't booked anything since late March, early April. And that was 8 months ago. Like, we should have been 90% of the way booked in our business for the coming whole year. And we're maybe 15, 20% booked. And so I'm painting him this picture plus the miscarriage. And I felt this relief that I finally told him honestly what was happening in the business. That was one of the first steps to me starting to change my own thinking. It was in that time that Stephen sat with me and he just said, hey, it's okay to feel whatever you're feeling right now. I know we're going to figure this out. And I didn't believe it, but I felt comforted knowing he did. And he just asked me, what do you want? And I had heard the question before in my life, but for some reason in that moment, just taking that step, asking him, telling him, I need help. My life is a mess right now. I have backed myself into a corner. I have been dealing with regular panic attacks on probably a weekly basis. I have been dealing with high levels of stress and anxiety. I'm not sleeping from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. every night. He didn't know any of that because I didn't tell him, because perfection. I had to be perfect. So me saying, that's all a facade. That was a veneer. There's nothing underneath of it. And to know that no matter what, like, I had someone supporting me in the process, that was the first step. I didn't know it at the time. I just felt so ashamed.
Stephanie, what do you think caused the anxiety you were experiencing and the panic attacks in retrospect?
That is a good question. So when I think back, I remember feeling like there were so many things I didn't know how to figure out. And when I look deeper, I didn't believe that I was capable of figuring them out. So when it got to the point of my to-do list being filled with things that I didn't know how to figure out, and I didn't believe I was capable of figuring out, I started to panic every single day. And I would just sit on the couch and I would tell Stephen, sometimes he'd ask me what I would do in a day just to like catch up with me. And I would tell him, I feel like the best thing I can do for our business is to sit very still and just breathe. Because if I move too much, I feel like the whole world is going to come crashing down on me. And so I would literally sit very still, clench all my muscles, and just breathe on the couch. And it was inherently this belief that I didn't believe I was capable of figuring things out on my own. I believed that somebody else had to do it for me.
I am going to stop you right there because this is just such a great point. I've been working within the field of anxiety for 14 plus years. And I always tell people, but this is known amongst people working with anxiety, when we're anxious, which is a feeling of unsafety, right? Like I'm no longer safe, the mind tends to increase the likelihood of the risk of whatever it is that we're afraid of and diminish the likelihood of our ability to cope with that risk.
Yes.
Exactly what you were describing, right? Like you were seeing the problem to be massive, perhaps greater than what it was. And you were pairing that with, I don't have what it takes to overcome this.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to point out to our listeners that if you're doing that, you're guaranteed to go into panic.
Yeah.
Right? Because at that point, you're saying the risk is greater and I have zero ability to cope. And so looking for self-reassurance is what really gets you out of that thinking. And I think, Stephanie, for you, started with talking to your husband and just like coming clean with, I have been anxious. I don't think I have what it takes. In your thinking at that point, you were thinking like somebody else is going to have to do this for me or somebody else is going to have to help me. How did you arrive to like, that somebody else is me? I am trying to save my day because I know that's what you did. What made you come to that conclusion?
Yeah, so it took a little bit to get there. But I think that when you're dealing with chronic stress, anxiety, panic, the best thing for me, and I didn't know this, I look back at my journey and realize, wow, this is so exactly what I needed. The best thing for me was to ease into it. So Stephen asked me what I wanted, and I was like, I just want to light a candle and journal. And so I did. And that was the first way of me determining, first of all, what I want, and then acting on it, which proved to me the reality that I am capable of getting what I want. And it was a very small step. And it was a series of compounding efforts that then led me to going, I can have what I want. And I am absolutely capable of getting myself there. So it started really small. That's how it started. And then it was everyday journaling. When I felt sad, me going, I don't need to feel anything else. Let's just let the thoughts live outside of our minds. And I would just, every day, I would make a ritual of journaling out my grief in an ugly notebook. And I specifically got an ugly one because I really wanted it to be something that I didn't feel was too precious to record the pain I was experiencing. So that's where I started. And pretty soon I noticed that it was like a storm cloud. Like the journal itself feels like a storm. It's heavy, dark clouds in the beginning. And then throughout the journal, it starts breaking up. And then there was one part in the journal where I captured a new idea. And I thought, wait a minute, I've only been grieving. And all of a sudden I have this idea. And then I started capturing more new ideas. And I started seeing that there was hope for the future and that I was a person capable of creating new ideas. And I still didn't know the how yet, but I was riding the waves and seeing where this took me. And it was in that time that I said, you know what? I don't know the how, but I know I have ideas and I don't want to let them go anymore. And I got help. And that's when I started seeing a therapist and I got a business coach.
Okay. So, oh my God, so much to pull from that. So for anybody listening, I always want you guys to walk away with tools. So I really want to make sure that I'm pulling this out.
Yeah.
So that you see what helped her get to a better place. Even to a better place is even getting to a place where you think you need help, where you ask for that help. That's already a better place. Most people think there's no way I am going to be asking for help. That will make me look so weak. But that's a sign of strength and that you're actually improving your condition.
Yeah.
So first things, you were journaling. So, well, first you talked to your husband. So you came to terms with, I may have anxiety. I may have a fear of not being perfect. Then you went into journaling, and it's a coincidence, but I usually ask my clients to buy 2 journals when they have anxiety. One is a pretty one and one is an ugly one. And the ugly one is the one I call the dumpster because I just want people to place the thoughts that are taking away space, precious space from their mind's real estate, occupying them with terrifying thoughts. And those are the ones that should go into this dumpster notebook. I personally have one that I bought at the dollar store, and it's ugly, the ugliest I could have found.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's looking very skinny because I actually take this a step further, and then I rip those pages out. Once the words are out of my mind, I also want them out of my house. So I rip these pages out. Whereas my pretty one has a growing tree in the front, and it's got all my sticky notes and beautiful quotes. And that's where I put all my great ideas. Those are the ones I keep. I love opening the ones that I've created 3 years ago because they still have good ideas that, like, you know, as an entrepreneur myself, I'm always thinking like, this would be a great workshop theme. So I will write things in there that are motivating and that are happy. So if you're listening to this particular podcast and you're thinking this is exciting, write things down that you're learning that you think your future self would like to read again. Yeah. So that's super therapeutic, and I'll tell you why. Because in Stephanie's case, she was like keeping these thoughts in her head and feeding them, and like the mind thinks you haven't done anything about the thought, so it keeps trying to produce action. So when you write them down, the mind kind of checks it off. Okay, we've done something about it. She's dealt with it. So that was amazing. And then obviously seeing a therapist and getting a coach, you know. Not everybody will need a therapist. Maybe you want a coach. Maybe you want one that wears both hats. But it was finding the right match for you and finding, like, you know, this person who could help you through this vulnerable place. Now, you had a miscarriage amongst all of what you were going through, which I know personally has been one of the most difficult emotional moments in my personal life. How did you cope with that?
Yeah, I think I was so surprised at that I felt so much grief about that. So I found out that I was pregnant, went to see a doctor, and the doctor said, something's not adding up. Like, your levels don't make sense. I don't, like, are you sure you're pregnant? I was like, yeah, I am. And she said, hey, I'm really sorry, but I think if you haven't already, I think you might miscarry soon. And I thought, no, this isn't happening. No. I was in denial. And it was 3 days later that I miscarried. And I knew what was happening because she told me what to look for. And it was in that time that I started feeling the grief, and I started feeling depression. And I made it worse initially by saying, I need to feel differently than I'm feeling right now. And so I actually gave myself this time limit, this arbitrary time limit, because perfectionist and like, I need to move on with my life and like button this up and be done. Right. So, and I realized it's like very brutalist to look back on, but I was like, I'll give myself 1 week. During this week, these 5 business days, I can feel whatever I want to feel. And then we're done with it. We're moving on. Get over it. And that's not how we work.
No.
That's not at all how we work. And I think it was right around that time that so initially I started journaling, and I started journaling in a stream of consciousness style. So it was just however I was feeling when I noticed that emotions were coming up for me. Now, for me, this happened every day at the same time. It was 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and I felt like a gray fog was rolling into my life. So I would light candles because I wanted to feel really cozy and comforted during this time. So whatever I was doing, I would go upstairs, I would change into like pajamas, put on like a bathrobe, I would light candles, I would play comforting acoustic music, and I would journal. And I would grab a box of Kleenex and I would cry and journal. Now, the journaling technique, stream of consciousness style, is something that if you haven't read the book, The Artist's Way, the author goes into it there. It's called Morning Pages. And the author talks about how you can you just want to capture your thoughts fresh out of your brain as they sound in your brain, and just write and write and write for 5 minutes. So that's what I did. I would set my timer, or whatever the amount of time is. I would just set a timer And I would just say, you're just writing everything in your brain for 5 minutes. And then I upped it to 10 minutes. And that helped me at least see what was happening. And then it was almost like my brain felt a relief. Then I started playing with journaling techniques. Once I felt like I was getting things out of my brain on a regular basis, I did one thing, and this was incredibly impactful. This was a pretty life-changing exercise for me. And I want to pass this along to you if you're listening going, I feel terrible right now. I feel burned out. I feel like incredibly trapped in a glass box of perfection. And I don't know my way out. What I did was I took a piece of paper in my journal and I divided it in half. So I had a top half and a bottom half. On the top half, I just wrote out all the names that identified best with how I was with my emotions. So I felt depressed, grief, angry, frustrated. I just wrote all of those things out. And I didn't necessarily know how to practice acceptance yet, but this was a first step of me saying it exists on the paper and I'm not changing it. I'm not forcing it into something else. On the bottom half, I then wrote how I wished I would feel, because quite frankly, it doesn't get much worse than grief and depression and learning how to let go of anxiety. Like that's pretty rock bottom. And so I knew, like, if I never felt this way again, I would be absolutely okay with it. And then I asked myself, what would I want to feel instead? And I wrote all those things down. I wanted to feel happy. I wanted to feel joy. And I listed all of those things out on the bottom half of the page. When I looked at that, I thought, there's no way it's possible. Like, I don't think it's possible for people to just feel happy. Which, Olga, you're probably like, yeah, that's how it's supposed to be. I didn't know that. And I looked at that and I was like, I judged myself very harshly for even wanting to regularly feel happy and joyful.
Like you were not deserving of that happiness?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I wrote it down and I let it be. And I just thought, wow, I can't even imagine a life where I just regularly felt happy and joyful. But I let that live on the piece of paper. So do that exercise and then just let it go. Let it live, set the intention and release it. And then I just started taking steps. Like, it can't get much worse from here. What do I need to do to feel better? And so I started, meeting with my therapist to overcome my grief, and meeting with my business coach, because even though I had run our business into the ground, I knew that the reason I had was I didn't know how to do some things. And so I needed to get help figuring out the how. So I started taking those steps. And a year later, I found my big, ugly purple notebook and I started looking through it. And I'm so glad I kept it. In any other case, I think I would absolutely write everything down and tear out the pages. But in this case, this was a memorial to my journey. And I looked back through it and I found that page where I wrote how I felt at the beginning of 2017 and how I felt at the end, how I wanted to feel a year later. And I actually felt the way I thought I could never feel. I felt happy. I felt joyful. I was so intensely proud of myself, which was a feeling I had never experienced. And all of this started because my husband asked me this question, what is it that you want? Mm-hmm. And I actually stopped and answered it. And I didn't answer it by giving him an answer that I thought he wanted, because that's what perfectionists do. We want the things that look good to everyone else, right? So we don't actually know what we want. We're like a hollow chocolate bunny that they sell at Easter time. Like there's nothing inside. And I learned to fill myself up.
And I think something you mentioned yesterday about the perfectionist mind, which I think is important and relevant to bring back, is how your sense of value and purpose comes strictly from the outside world.
Oh, yes.
So that validation of other people saying, good job, Stephanie, you're doing great, makes you so happy that reinforces this thinking of wanting to, or giving the answers or doing the things that you believe makes everybody else happy, but then creates a disconnect between you, not trusting yourself in the end. Like, well, what do I want? What do I like? So in Buddhism, actually, when people get married, they ask them 3 times the same question. do you take this man or this woman as your husband or as your wife? And then they repeat the question 3 times. And so in a type of meditation that I guide, I usually ask people that same question your husband asked you 3 or 4 times, so that they go deeper and deeper into the answer. The first answer may be like, I want to be happy. The second one might be like a deeper answer, because now I'm forcing you to go deeper into that thinking. So it's amazing what happened. Now, last time I interviewed you on this same thing, you talked about 4 specific steps that you took. One was being with the emotions, which you described beautifully. That's an act of mindfulness, sitting and down and letting whatever emotions just be. So what you do with the candles and like getting comfortable and letting the emotions be. And you took it as an extra step, which I absolutely love, which was writing them down. Yeah. And looking at them in the eye, basically. I see you, you're here. And that's the thing about these emotions. Whether you like them or not, they showed up. You may as well just acknowledge them. Yeah. And then you talked about visualizing. And I think you used a vision board and you went into beliefs. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So this is where it gets good. You hit on something that is so important. And that is, if you are struggling with perfectionism, you don't know what you want, because it doesn't matter what you want. You've prostituted yourself out to the approval of others. Perfectionists don't need perfection. They need to rank themselves among the people, right? I needed to know that of all the people doing what I was doing, I was above them. I was better than them. I was perfect. And that's not real. But because I was getting affirmation, I felt like it was real. So ultimately, the problem was that I didn't know what I wanted. And it's like getting an Uber and getting into the Uber. And what do you do when you get an Uber? You put in the destination, right? Yeah. This reality that I'm describing, it's like getting an Uber, hopping in, and him going, hey, you didn't put in a destination. Where am I taking you? And you saying, I do not care. Just take me anywhere but the airport. What is it? The Uber driver is going to be like, that's not how this works. Try again. I need to know where to take you. And then you say, anywhere but the airport and anywhere but the zoo. Don't take me there either. He still needs to know where you're going. So if you're a perfectionist and you've been thriving on the approval of other people, I have to let you know this doesn't work. You cannot, there's a short shelf life to this. And what you do need to do is get in touch with what you actually want. So I did this by creating a vision board. Now, this is just a visual representation of things and experiences I wanted to bring into my life over the next year. So things I wanted to own or acquire, experiences I wanted to create, ways that I wanted to be generous, things I wanted to accomplish. And I looked at that and thought, wow, if this were real in my life, I would feel happy. And I just kept looking at that.
So was that guided to you by your coach, or how did you get to that?
I think it might have been. I'm not actually sure, but it probably was. Mm-hmm. I definitely felt like somewhere along the line with talking with my husband, my therapist, my coach, getting clear on this idea of what I want became bigger, of like, oh, there's an underlying problem that you don't know what you're ultimately aiming for. Mm-hmm. Like what you actually want, what gives you life, what brings you joy. You don't know. And you're thriving on this false benefit of like affirmation. Like when we don't have the clarity in our life, there's always something that's like giving us a false benefit. Because if we didn't have that, we would stop doing this destructive tendency.
Right.
So I always have this false benefit. That was mine.
But I think it's so important. The other point you were bringing, going back to the Uber, it's impossible to get to a place or a destination if you have zero idea of where that location is.
Yes.
And I think you brought up something really, really good. I was actually talking about this last night in my meditation class, which is people will tell me I cannot imagine things. I have no good imagination. However, they have crazy anxiety. So I tell them,
That's a very good imagination.
you have an amazing imagination because all day long you're picturing scenarios that you don't want to experience, and we feel it so real. So I think the giving direction to the mind, it's such an important takeaway from this conversation, because it's easy to focus, obsess, and overthink about the things we do not want, right? Like, she didn't want to go to the airport or this other place. That was her focus. When they asked her what she wanted, she answered what she didn't want. That's the majority of us. So what that does is just bring your brain back and back to the things that you actually don't want to feel or experience, which changes your experience of the present, right? So it kind of plays against you. So that's when it's important to really focus your mind on goals that you truly want. So I often ask my clients, what do you want to cultivate? What do you want to see growing in your life, and how are you cultivating those things? Right. Like, so the transportation for me, keep talking about Uber, goal is, how are you cultivating that? People tell me, Olga, I know I don't want to do this job forever. But okay, you've been so busy thinking about you don't want to do that you haven't even stopped to think, what do you want to do? What would be an ideal job? And how can you cultivate that job? And this, by the way, guys, can be done with your health, with relationships, with anything, right? It's just focusing the mind on what you do want to see happening, so that the mind helps you find evidence that that's possible.
Yes.
So you did this before you went into the vision board? You kind of got clear on what you wanted to see?
Yeah. Yep. So I just played around with the idea. And then when I felt like I had a good idea of what I actually wanted, I would save images on Pinterest. I would journal things, and I would write myself letters from the future version of myself, which is an amazing technique. If you're listening to this, try this. Imagine you're the ideal version of yourself. You're absolutely thriving, and you're writing a letter to you now. So it's a year from now or 5 years from now, you are in your ideal state. Write yourself a letter to who you are now. Give yourself some encouragement, some like, hey, I just want to let you know from the future, it's all going to be okay. So I started doing that just to play around with the idea of what my ideals could look like. And then when I felt like, hey, here are a few things that are really like I'd love to see happen sooner, I put those on the vision board, and I thought, like, oh my word, I think if I accomplished those things in a year, I would be so impressed. Here's the thing. Our brains are so powerful. When we focus them on what we want, just like when we focus them on what we didn't want, our brains showed us evidence of what we didn't want all around us. Our brains are going to do the same thing when we focus our brains powerfully on what we do want. So I had this vision board, I had it in front of me, and I started looking at it every day. Now, there is something with vision boards that I started realizing, and this is where I do think people go wrong often. Looking at the vision board isn't just about creating possibility and getting you where you want to go. The vision board can absolutely help you stay focused and get there. However, probably more powerfully than that, what a vision board can do for you, and this is one of the steps in my changing your thinking process. First of all, know where you want to go. Second, scan the vision board regularly and record on a piece of paper all the limiting beliefs that you sense or hear in your mind when you look at that. All the impossibility, all the I could never do that, all the, oh, everyone else can do that but me. So I would look at this and I would see where I put $100,000 this year. And I would look at that and look at the fact that I had $20,000 on the books and think, oh, that's not possible. I can't even do that. And then I would write that down because I knew that thought was the problem, not the $100,000, right? So I started recording all my limiting beliefs, and then I started replacing them. So in order to replace them, though, you have to learn to do the valuable thing I learned earlier. You have to learn to sit with them. You have to learn to meet them, and you have to learn to feel what you feel whenever you have that belief. right? So our beliefs are created when we have a thought paired with an emotion, and our brains automate that. So undoing that means you have to separate them back out again. That normally we have like just a triggered response, and then we then act on it, and we have to take that back apart. So we have to go back to, okay, wait a minute, I felt something. So what was the thought behind what I was feeling? I felt anxious. What was the thought behind that? So I had to actually deconstruct my limiting beliefs and sit with whatever the feeling was that they triggered: anxiety, stress, comparison, unworthiness, whatever that was. Let myself feel it. And then I started rewriting those beliefs. So if I don't want to believe that I can't possibly make $100,000 in the next 6 months, then what do I want to believe instead? And I started rewriting those beliefs, like money flows easily to me. So of course I can make $100,000 in 6 months. And when I started actually rewriting those beliefs, and I would literally rewrite them. So I'd write my limiting beliefs on one section of the page, and right next to it, I would write the empowering beliefs. So that's another technique you can use right now. And I would say the empowering beliefs out loud repeatedly. And anytime I started learning to identify the limiting beliefs when they came up, and then I would out loud say them. I would say the empowering beliefs. So I was starting to tell my brain, I don't like that. I want something else. Right. And my brain started automating something different.
And so you pair that with images on the vision board. So you were in alignment,
yes.
Aligning the desire, what was in your heart, with the thinking. And now you were giving yourself a visual of what that was. That's super powerful. So that's like 3 or 4 steps in there. When did you feel better? When did you feel the anxiety was gone? When did you feel that your business, in 4 months you changed your business and brought it back up. So are those the steps you took to bring the business back on and feel like you were on top of your game again?
Yeah, so that's the work I was doing internally. And then the power behind that is, and this is why people always think they need something external to make themselves feel better in order to prove that they can then feel better. Mm-hmm. But I was doing this internal work because I felt like, I've never done this before. Something's got to change. And meanwhile, I'm meeting with my business coach and she's giving me homework assignments. But initially, I was avoiding them. I was putting them off. And as I was doing this work, changing my own thinking behind the scenes, all of a sudden, I was accomplishing everything she told me to do with ease. And I would notice like, oh, wow, that was so much easier than I realized. And I would affirm that every time. I would say, of course it's easy. I can do anything. There's nothing I can't do. And I would create these little affirmations and I would catch when I felt surprised and I would affirm the good thing I had just done. Like, you just did a hard thing. Look at you. You can do hard things.
Right.
And you did it so fast. And now it's over and you survived.
Because it's interesting. This desire to want people to recognize us is one thing, but it is usually the same perfectionist people who, when people do recognize that you're doing something great, you minimize yourself. So I'm often telling my perfectionist people, hey, you can't see your greatness. I wish you could see what I see from sitting here, right? And that's such an important point. I think recognizing your success, even if it's small and the perfectionist mind tells you, that's really too small to celebrate, just to come home and celebrate that. Okay, you've got those recognitions. You've obviously became aware. First of all, you had a problem. You talk it out. You found help.
Yeah.
You started to pick up on your limiting beliefs. You were journaling at the same time, so creating more awareness. Like, without awareness, guys, you have nothing.
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing. Like, fish don't know they're in water until they're pulled out of water. Like, you need to create that awareness to be able to change anything at all about your perception, your existence, your experience. And then you created a vision board to go along with new beliefs. You were restoring beliefs into your mind. even though your mind wanted still to think, I can't make that much money. I'm not a business person, or I am, but I don't know what I'm doing. And why did that manifest physically into your business being more successful?
4 months from the time that I made my vision board.
That's amazing.
I thought it would take me a year. And it was 4 months in that I realized I was looking at my vision board and I realized I have brought into my life all the things on here. I need to dream bigger. And I made a new one. So I made the vision board March, April, May, June. And in like end of June, early July of that year, I already had everything and I was making a new one. I had 6 figures on the books. And at the end of it was at the end of the year that I really saw the impact. I found that journal entry where I put how I really wished I would feel. And then I realized it's so much more than accomplishments the change that I've made is so much more than accomplishments. The accomplishments are simply the result of me learning to pursue joy. Mm-hmm. And it was in that end of year, just like reflection that I realized that I actually feel happy all the time. That is my state of being. I feel joyful all the time. And when I don't, I actually stop and think, oh, something needs attention. And that's when I realized all the work that I had accomplished was so much greater than rebuilding my business and being able to accomplish a lot in a short amount of time. It was so much greater than that.
So, and then when did you decide, like, I'm going to be teaching this to other people? This worked for me. And now you see it working for other people.
Yeah. So I had somebody reach out to me shortly after I made my second vision board. So middle of the summer, somebody reached out to me in a similar place. And I immediately felt sad for her. She had such a weight about her energy. Mm-hmm. And she was really sad. She was really discouraged and confused. And I said, hey, I'll meet you for coffee. And right before I left for coffee, I told Steven, I said, hey, I want to try coaching her. I'm going to pitch this and see what happens. And if nothing else, like, at least I've encouraged her. And in that moment, she said to me, I would pay whatever it took to feel better. And I was like, I have been there. I know exactly how you're feeling right now. And I took her on as my first client. And from there, I just started organically getting new clients without doing any promotion. And it was January of that next year that I was like, okay, let's actually do this. Let's see how much this second business can build up. And I was at that time 6 months pregnant with our baby boy. And I thought it was an ideal time to launch a second business, clearly. But I trusted myself. I knew I would figure anything out.
So this is interesting because that Stephanie compared to the one you were describing earlier, big difference. Yeah. Earlier, Stephanie would have never adventured into this new coaching business because she didn't have any guarantees that she was going to be perfect at it.
Yeah.
And what I hear most of my clients say, and like even I went through that before I opened my private practice. I kept pulling the bar higher and higher. Well, I must complete this many trainings. I must be able to do, have a physical space that is of this size. Like I just kept coming up with excuses as to why I couldn't just open my business. And it's interesting once you try it out and you decided to try it out with your friend and then you saw the success with her, how you don't really need to be perfect or wait for all conditions to be in the perfect alignment, that sometimes you just have to go out and try it. And I know the perfectionist mind wants to compare it to others and be like, well, but this person has this many degrees on that. That's why they're doing what they're doing. So I think that's amazing. Any last words of wisdom or advice that you want to share with my audience, Stephanie?
If you're listening to this feeling like you're a perfectionist, you would identify with that idea, that term. I just want to tell you that you're worthy of all the happiness that you currently think you can't have. Why keep putting it off? Just go for it. Why measure yourself against people that don't ultimately matter? All you're doing is lessening your impact. So from somebody who gets it to you, I just want to tell you there's so much more available to you. if you just get clear on what you want and just tell yourself, I'm just going to take that next step. You can do it, and you'll be so much happier in the process.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, so if you're listening to this thinking, I am a perfectionist, I have anxiety, bring yourself back to the thinking. What are you thinking? What do you think needs to change? Where do you want to go? And once you have set a destination, it's a lot easier to think of those next steps. Whatever you do, whatever you go with your whole heart, because that's your best guide right there. Nobody, not even Stephanie or myself, can tell you what's the best path for you. But if you follow your heart, there'll be zero regrets, I promise you, even if there's mistakes along the way. Stephanie, from the bottom of my heart and on behalf of my audience, thank you so much for showing up into our journey to happy and sharing your own journey to happy, because it's empowering and it's just so refreshing to see that people can go from being terrified to being brave and courageous and saying, oh, I'm doing this and this is how. And you and I still have a lot of conversations where I can tell you're still like human, and you still have moments where you're like, whoa, is this my old self showing up? Which is usually a myth that, some of my clients, my coaching clients have, that once they've made progress, there's never a step back. And they're not step backs. This is in your blueprint. You are going to have a tendency to be a perfectionist. And it's just keeping that in check so that it doesn't take over you. Stephanie, where can people reach out to you if we do have some entrepreneurs listening that would love to be coached by you or to follow you? Where can they find you?
Yeah, so I am online at successfulcreative.co. And then I'm most active on Instagram. So let's connect on Instagram. Send me a DM. My handle is at @thesuccessfulcreative. And I love DMing. So shoot me a DM. Tell me what you're going through and let me at least cheer you on, right? You deserve that, and slide into my DMs. I don't think that's weird. I would love to connect with you.
And they're actually a lot of fun.
Yes, agreed.
Her stories are fun. Her page is beautiful. So I suggest you do that. Guys, if you like this podcast, please let us know. Tell us your thoughts. Leave us a review. It is a lot easier to continue to bring qualified people to these interviews when the podcasts are reviewed, when people leave sincere, genuine comments about what they are, whether you like them or not. And if you are listening to this and somebody else pops into your mind that's like, oh my God, this person should really listen to it, don't be shy to share this podcast. This information belongs to all of us, and that's the purpose of it, is to share tips and suggestions so that you too can come and walk into your journey to happiness. So thank you so much for listening today. Let us know what you thought about it. If you want to connect with Stephanie, don't be shy. If you have questions for her or me, also reach out. You know where to find us at olgasway.com. And I cannot wait to see how you put into practice some of these tips. And if you do, also come back. Tell us what worked. We'll be very curious to hear that. Stephanie, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.